I gave Claude a scope document and asked it to build the entire Airtable database. Here's what happened. Welcome to the channel. If you're new here, my name is Gareth and this is Gap Consulting. And it's our mission here to help you unlock the full potential of Airtable and related no-code tools. And in this video, I'm going to be showing you how you can connect Claude with Airtable. We're going to take a sample scope of work and share it with Claude and see what Claude can do with Airtable. This is going to shave hours off of your next Airtable build, so learning these skills will greatly improve your efficiency with your next Airtable build. Now, before we jump into it, I first want to invite you to join us for a strategy call. If you are sitting down for your next Airtable build soon, or you have questions about what you can complete in Airtable, our team is on standby and would love to join you for a 20-minute introductory call to walk through your next project. This is completely free. You can sign up at gapconsulting.io/strategy-call. And from that call, you will get clarity on your next steps with your Airtable build. Now let's swing into the scope of work that we are sharing with Claude. Now, first and foremost, we're going to start with the framing here. This is a scope of work document in a PDF. It is a sample. This is not an actual project, and we are just outlining what it is that we are trying to capture on this particular scope. So we start with an overview. It contains the objectives, user groups and access requirements, the current state summary, which is outlining where the client currently is. Then we go into the future state vision. This is where we're identifying what we are building toward. Then we talk about the tech stack and licensing requirements. And I want to call out that for this example scope of work, the core platform lies on Airtable, and we are calling out that there is also a Slack workspace and perhaps some Zapier integrations in the future. But for the purpose of this example scope of work, there is no fancy integration outside of the native Airtable environment. Then section 7, and this is probably the most important for this video, is the data architecture overview. We're calling out the different layers of the database, and this should happen in any well-documented scope of work. We're saying, hey, we've got clients, we have contacts, we have projects, deliverables, billing milestones. So these are the different tables, and each of these will need to be created in Airtable and linked appropriately. You also see the relationship summary, which outlines how these tables relate to each other. Now, this scope of work continues on because it is a pretty extensive example, but the core component that we need for building the initial skeleton in Airtable is this data architecture overview. So let's now take this and jump into Claude. So this is the next step. Jumping across to Claude, the first thing I did was share the PDF with a simple prompt. So this is the sample scope of work, and I'm letting Claude know that I'm sharing a scope of work with you for a solution, and I'm calling out the software. Of course, the tighter and more extensive your prompts are, the better outputs you get from AI. So we're calling out that we're integrating this or building this in Airtable, and we are asking Claude to review the SOW and present the data schema. So we called out the data schema here, as you know, section 7, clients, contacts, projects, etc. And so we are basically asking Claude to repeat this back to us in our first step to make sure that Claude has the proper understanding of what it is we're building. And you can see that Claude gives us a really good output. Here are the clients, here are the contacts, the team members, the projects, billing milestones, and deliverables. These are all components that were included here with the exception of team members. Team members, of course, we did not call out as a specific layer to our database, but ultimately, Claude has the right idea here in what we're building. Now, before we proceed, this would be the time to tighten it up with Claude. If we wanted to get rid of the team members and remove that as a separate table in Airtable, for example, we would do that next. But let's assume that we are willing to take what Claude has given us just as written, and now we want to connect the MCP. So what is an MCP? Well, it stands for Model Context Protocol. Essentially, this gives Claude permission to write, read, edit things in Airtable through a direct integration. Now, MCPs exist for different LLMs to other external software. Of course, in our example, we are using specifically Claude, and we're connecting it specifically to Airtable. There are many different MCPs, but that's the one that we're going to leverage for our system here. So the first thing we need to do is make sure that we've set up that MCP with Airtable. To load these tools inside of Claude, the first thing I'll do is go down to the plus button here in my chat where it says Files, Connectors, and More. When I select this, if I already have the connector set up, it will appear in my connectors, but I'm going to be starting from scratch here to add a new connector. So I'll select this choice, and this will open up in a sub window here, the different connectors. And I can do a quick search for Airtable to find the Airtable MCP. By clicking on here, it's going to open up in a separate window and ask me what I want to give permission to. Now, for our example, I will say all resources, but if you want to limit what Claude has access to, you can select specific databases and handpick them through the Add a Base option. But here we go. I will add all of the resources for our example, and I will grant access. So this will take just a moment. It'll redirect us. And once we get to here, we can just say open Claude, and it's going to take us back to the system that is now set up. So by closing that down, if I were to come back to connectors, we see now Airtable is set up. Make sure it's toggled on, and this gives Claude permission to use this tool. We can turn off the other tools that we're using here if we don't want Claude to mistakenly use any other resources. We want to limit it just to Airtable's MCP for this next step. Now, switching back over here, let's make sure that we have Airtable pulled up on our other screen as well. And we will say, please create a new database given this schema output. I've enabled the Airtable MCP. And we'll give Claude these instructions and see what happens next. It's not copying and pasting. That's the key takeaway here. Claude is actually doing some of the thinking and then the heavy lifting on the back end. Now you'll notice that Claude is asking us for permission here. We can say always allow, or we can allow just one time. For our example, because I want to keep things moving along, I will say always allow. Now, my personal preference on the MCP connectors is to say, anytime you need to read information in Airtable, you don't have to ask for permission. So I give it the always allow. However, if you're going to be creating things or creating new records, creating tables, fields, you do need to ask me. That's my personal preference, but of course, set up your MCP settings however you prefer. It is something that you have a lot of control over inside of the system. Now, what we see is Claude thinking through all the different steps here, and inside of Airtable, now we see that it's already created the database. In this case, it's called it Sonder Creative. That is the sample name that we have in our scope of work. And we can see that it started to build out the different tables. So not only is it able to create the tables, it is also creating the fields and, most importantly, the connections. So it's established the connection between clients and contacts, for example. And it's also setting up the information, the little detail about each one of these tables. So we see now Claude has finished doing its work, and it's saying, hey, I've used your Gap Consulting workspace. So this is important if, like in our example, you've allowed Claude to see access to your entire Airtable, then it will call out to you where it actually built the database. And of course, you might also search under the name. So if you've had a conversation with Claude about what you want this database to be called, that's how I found this. Now, it's telling us what it did and what it did not do. So all 6 tables were created, wired up the linked fields, all done, and then it gave us a synopsis of what was built. So again, as you see, the entire database set up from scratch, named, and then all of the tables built with the appropriate connections and at least the framework for the different layers here. So I've got the full name, the email, the role, the status, etc. So Claude has done its work, and the MCP greatly sped up the overall process. Number one, I was able to drop a scope of work into Claude, extract the information from that, and essentially put together a data schema verbally. in text. Then, as you saw, Claude took the data schema and applied it to Airtable. All of this through the MCP, and we didn't so much as break a sweat, and it happened in what? A matter of minutes. So a lot of good things are happening here, and frankly, this has probably saved us a few hours of an initial build. But let's be really specific about what's not happening. What does the MCP not do, at least not yet? Well, number one, the MCP did not build any automations. So any of the workflows, any of the integrations with third-party tools, anything outside of Airtable, that is not handled by the MCP. Number two, it did not do anything with forms. To date, the MCP with Claude does not create or edit forms. So it can create tables, it can create fields, but nothing in terms of your workflow. Automations and forms are out. And thirdly, we have the interface layer. Nothing on the interface layer was added to our system. So yes, the MCP, while incredibly powerful, only creates the skeleton, not the full system. So it can really shave some time off of your build, but it's not a replacement for deep thinking and really knowing how to build the different integrations, the different interfaces, and how people are actually going to work within the system once it goes live. Now, one thing that I have not showcased here is the fact that the MCP can also create records for you inside of Airtable. So if you ever wanted data to be created or edited, it could do that as well. Another thing to note, though, if you are using this MCP in your next build, don't 100% rely on its formulas. I would suggest testing every single formula that the MCP helps to create. So any field where you have a calculated output, the MCP doesn't fully test these. So make sure to validate any formulas that the MCP creates, because if you don't test it extensively, you could be surprised on the other side. That's it for this video. I hope that you got a ton of value here and that you are able to build faster and better in Airtable thanks to the MCP with Claude and Airtable. If you liked this video, be sure to subscribe to the channel for more content like this and give us a thumbs up to help that algorithm. If you have questions that we did not cover, swing by our website because we have a ton of resources for you there. But most importantly, keep on building.